London in the height of the season was a city that glittered by candlelight and cut by whispers, and on one such evening, beneath the steady glow of crystal chandeliers, Miss Eleanor Whitcombe learned how swiftly admiration could curdle into judgment. She stood in a drawing-room scented with beeswax and roses, her posture composed, her gloved hands folded with habitual restraint, while the murmur of polite conversation bent subtly away from her, as water parts around a stone. It was not that she lacked beauty, nor breeding, nor intelligence. It was that England, in those rigid Regency years, demanded more than virtue from a woman. It demanded fortune, lineage unbroken by failure, and a name unsullied by rumor. Eleanor possessed only two of the three. She was the daughter of a gentleman ruined not by vice but by misjudgment, a man who had trusted too much, invested too boldly, and died leaving his only child little more than dignity and debt. That dignity Eleanor wore carefully, like a gown mended too often to withstand further tearing. She had been raised to courtesy, to discipline, to the quiet endurance expected of women who knew the cost of visible emotion. Yet even such training could not fully shield her from the sentence that had passed through the room hours before she entered it. "You are not fit to be a wife." The words were not spoken in that drawing-room, nor even directly to her, yet they clung to her presence as if engraved upon her name. They belonged to His Grace, the Duke of Harrowfield, whose approval or dismissal carried the weight of law within society. Tall, reserved, and faultlessly correct, the Duke was a man shaped by inheritance and expectation, raised to believe that affection was a luxury and marriage a matter of strategy. When his mother, anxious for an alliance both respectable and advantageous, had suggested Miss Whitcombe as a prospective bride, he had answered with calm finality. Her lack of fortune, the whispers of her family's decline, and the precariousness of her position rendered her unsuitable. He had not raised his voice. He had not insulted her character. He had simply refused her, and in doing so, delivered her to the mercies of the ton. Eleanor did not hear his judgment from his lips. She learned of it as women often did, from glances that lingered too long, from invitations that arrived late or not at all, from the sudden chill in voices once warm with promise. A matron who had praised her Grace weeks earlier now offered sympathy thinly disguised as concern. A gentleman who had sought her hand for a dance found an urgent engagement elsewhere. Reputation, Eleanor understood, was not shattered by a single blow, but eroded grain by grain, until one woke to find it gone. Yet she did not retreat. That, perhaps, was the first act of quiet defiance. On the evening when many expected her absence, Eleanor appeared, dressed with modest elegance, her demeanor unaltered. She greeted her hostess with the same courtesy she always had, accepted a cup of tea she scarcely tasted, and bore the weight of scrutiny without complaint. In her stillness there was resolve, and in her resolve, something that unsettled those who observed her too closely. Across the room, the Duke of Harrowfield stood apart, as was his custom. He spoke when spoken to, listened more than he revealed, and surveyed society with a detachment mistaken for indifference. He had not anticipated Eleanor's presence. Indeed, he had assumed she would withdraw, wounded pride urging her into quiet obscurity. When he saw her standing beneath the chandelier's glow, conversing calmly with a dowager known for her severity, a faint tightening crossed his expression, quickly mastered. He did not approach her. Duty, as he understood it, forbade unnecessary complication. He had spoken truth as he saw it, and truth, once spoken, required no amendment. Yet he found, to his discomfort, that his attention returned to her despite himself. Eleanor moved with careful grace, never pressing forward, never yielding ground. She listened intently, spoke sparingly, and offered no defense of herself, as though trusting that her conduct would speak where words could not. The room, however, was less generous. Whispers threaded their way through the gathering, reshaping his words into crueler forms. Not fit to be a duchess became not fit to be a wife at all. Unsuitable became suspect. Eleanor felt the sting of each glance, the unspoken questions weighing upon her worth, and still she remained. To flee would be to confirm what they believed, that she was fragile, dependent, and ashamed. When at last the evening drew to a close, Eleanor departed with measured composure, though the night air cut cold against her cheeks. As her carriage carried her away through lamplit streets, she allowed herself a single, silent breath of release. She had been judged and found wanting by a man she scarcely knew, yet whose opinion now threatened to define her future. The injustice of it burned, not as anger, but as resolve. If society required proof of her worth, she would give it, not by pleading, but by perseverance. Behind her, within the glow of the drawing-room, the Duke remained standing long after others had gone. He told himself that what lingered in his thoughts was merely consequence, the unavoidable discomfort of decisions rightly made. Yet the image that returned to him was not of scandal, nor of whispered decline, but of a woman who had stood amid judgment and refused to bow. Unwittingly, the first crack had formed in the certainty he prized above all else, and though neither of them yet understood it, the season had only begun. The weeks that followed unfolded with deceptive calm, as though the season itself had decided to watch Miss Eleanor Whitcombe rather than pursue her. Invitations arrived again, not plentiful, yet sufficient, and Eleanor accepted each one with unaltered courtesy, aware that absence would be interpreted as defeat. She appeared at musicales, morning calls, and charitable gatherings, her presence steady, her conduct beyond reproach, until even her detractors were forced to concede that she bore scrutiny with uncommon composure. It was not admiration she sought, but equilibrium, the fragile balance that allowed a woman to remain visible without becoming vulnerable. At a small charity assembly supporting the widows of naval officers, Eleanor distinguished herself not through display but through diligence. She organized subscriptions, soothed disputes, and spoke with a clarity that surprised those who had dismissed her as merely well-mannered. Her efficiency did not go unnoticed. Word reached drawing-rooms where her name had once been spoken with pity, and there it was repeated with cautious respect. Still, respect did not silence rumor. It merely sharpened it, for society preferred its heroines unblemished or ruined, not resilient. The Duke of Harrowfield encountered her again at such a gathering, standing beside a table of neatly arranged ledgers, her brow faintly furrowed as she calculated figures. He had come in obligation, lending his name rather than his presence, and had not expected to find her so central to the proceedings. When she looked up and met his gaze, she inclined her head with perfect propriety, neither warmth nor reproach in her expression. He returned the gesture, aware of eyes upon them, and moved on. Yet the image of her, calm amid responsibility, followed him with an insistence he found increasingly difficult to dismiss. Small gestures began, though neither would have named them so. A book Eleanor had once admired during a brief visit to his library was returned to her lodgings, unaccompanied by a note, its margins bearing his familiar annotations. At a crowded ball, when the press of bodies threatened to overwhelm her, a space was made, unobtrusively, by the careful arrangement of partners and pauses, all traceable to his influence though never acknowledged. Each act was restrained, deniable, and precisely therefore, powerful. Society observed with sharpened interest. Whispers shifted tone, speculation feeding upon ambiguity. Why did the Duke watch her so closely, yet never approach? Why did Eleanor accept his distance without resentment? Some suggested remorse, others manipulation, and a few, scandal more intimate than either would have allowed. Eleanor endured it all with practiced calm, though in private moments the strain pressed heavily upon her. She reminded herself that dignity was her strongest defense, and that any overt claim, from either side, would invite consequences she could ill afford. It was then that a different rumor emerged, one carrying greater weight. A dispute concerning Harrowfield's estates, once resolved, was reopened by political rivals, casting doubt upon transactions made years earlier. The implication, though vague, was damaging: mismanagement, perhaps impropriety. The Duke, accustomed to authority, found himself the subject of careful scrutiny, his silence interpreted as guilt by those eager to diminish him. Invitations grew cautious. Conversations faltered at his approach. Eleanor learned of it indirectly, as she did all things of consequence. She heard his name spoken with the same inflection once applied to her own, that blend of curiosity and condemnation. Where others retreated, she spoke. At a luncheon attended by several influential matrons, she corrected an exaggerated account with measured precision, reminding them of the Duke's long-standing integrity and the lack of evidence against him. Her words were neither impassioned nor defensive, merely factual, and for that reason, persuasive. The risk was considerable. To align oneself publicly with a man under suspicion invited association with his potential fall. Eleanor understood this, yet chose clarity over caution. She did not seek his gratitude, nor even his awareness. She acted because truth demanded it, and because she knew too well the cruelty of unchallenged rumor. When her intervention reached him, relayed with surprise by a cousin, the Duke felt something unfamiliar and unsettling. She had defended him when silence would have been safer, and in doing so, altered the balance between them. They met again soon after, in the quiet of a gallery where portraits of ancestors watched with unblinking eyes. Their exchange was brief, constrained by propriety, yet charged with meaning. He thanked her, formally, and she accepted with equal restraint. Neither spoke of motives, yet both understood that something irrevocable had been set in motion. As Eleanor departed, leaving him amid the weight of his lineage, the Duke recognized that distance no longer shielded him. The season, once merely endured, had become a reckoning, and its outcome could no longer be controlled. The invitation arrived with the quiet precision of all things connected to the Duke of Harrowfield, delivered not through flourish but through formality, requesting Miss Eleanor Whitcombe's presence for a brief private conversation at his mother's townhouse during an hour when propriety might still be preserved. Eleanor read the card once, then again, her expression composed though her pulse betrayed her calm. A private audience, however constrained, invited interpretation, and interpretation remained society's most dangerous indulgence. Yet to refuse would signal fear, and fear had never served her. She prepared herself with deliberate care, choosing restraint over ornament, resolve over hope. The townhouse received her with dignified stillness, its corridors hushed, its servants discreet. She was shown into a small sitting room where the afternoon light filtered through tall windows, illuminating shelves of leather-bound volumes and a single arrangement of winter flowers. The Duke stood near the hearth, his posture controlled, his expression unreadable. When he turned to face her, he inclined his head, and Eleanor returned the gesture with equal precision, both acknowledging the delicate balance they were about to test. "I am grateful you came," he began, his voice measured, the cadence of a man accustomed to weighing each word. "I would not have requested this moment had it not been necessary." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I understand," she replied, neither inviting explanation nor offering concession. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but deliberate. He spoke again, acknowledging her intervention on his behalf, her defense offered without expectation. He did not cloak his words in flattery, nor did he apologize. Instead, he expressed recognition, a rare currency in his world. Eleanor listened, her hands folded, her expression composed, though within her something shifted, fragile and alert. "I did not act for you," she said at last, her tone calm yet firm. "I acted because truth deserves a voice, even when it is inconvenient." The simplicity of her statement struck him more deeply than any reproach might have done. He regarded her with new attention, seeing not a liability, but a woman governed by principle rather than advantage. For a moment, the rigid structures that had defined his decisions seemed less certain. He spoke of duty, of expectation, of the fear that any misstep might unravel generations of careful stewardship. In his world, affection was indulgence, and indulgence a threat. Eleanor did not argue. She did not plead. She spoke instead of endurance, of the quiet labor of maintaining dignity when the world sought to strip it away. She described the loneliness of being measured solely by circumstance, the exhaustion of proving worth through flawless conduct. Her voice never trembled, yet the weight of her experience filled the room. When she finished, the Duke found himself without immediate reply. The certainty that had once guided him faltered, replaced by something more precarious. He realized that his rejection had not merely protected him from scandal, it had wounded someone who possessed a resilience he had never required of himself. The knowledge unsettled him. He stepped closer, not in impropriety, but in acknowledgement, reducing the space between them to something charged yet restrained. "I believed distance would spare us both," he said quietly. "I see now that it has spared neither." Eleanor's breath caught, just once, before she mastered it. "Distance does not absolve consequence," she answered. "It merely delays understanding." The moment stretched, intimate without touch, confessional without surrender. He wanted, suddenly, to claim her, to speak plainly, to defy the structures that had governed him since boyhood. Yet the habits of restraint held firm. Instead, he offered her honesty without promise, respect without assurance. It was, perhaps, all he could manage. When at last the conversation ended, Eleanor rose, her composure intact, though her heart bore the imprint of what had been revealed and withheld. She declined his offer of escort, preserving the fragile boundary they had navigated. As she departed, the Duke remained standing, aware that something essential had passed between them, something neither could reclaim. Eleanor stepped back into the street with measured resolve. The season weighed heavily upon her, and withdrawal beckoned as a means of self-preservation. She resolved to leave London soon, to spare herself further scrutiny and to reclaim control over her future. The decision brought relief tinged with sorrow, for she understood now that her feelings, long disciplined, were no longer neutral. Within the townhouse, the Duke stood alone, the silence pressing upon him. For the first time, duty felt less like protection and more like avoidance. He recognized that his restraint, once a shield, had become a barrier not only to happiness but to honor. As the light faded and the room grew dim, he understood that choice loomed before him, unavoidable and irrevocable. The season had reached its turning point, and whatever came next would demand courage he had long denied himself. Hyde Park bloomed beneath a pale spring sky, its paths alive with carriages, parasols, and the low murmur of society performing itself with practiced ease. It was the final promenade of the season, a ritual farewell before departures scattered the ton to country estates and continental journeys. Eleanor Whitcombe arrived without announcement, her presence understated yet unmistakable, dressed with restrained elegance that spoke not of ambition but of farewell. Those who noticed her sensed something conclusive in her bearing, as though she walked not to be seen, but to take leave. She moved along the gravel path with unhurried composure, acknowledging greetings with gentle nods, offering neither explanation nor invitation. Whispers followed, softer now, touched with uncertainty rather than scorn. Some wondered whether she was bound for obscurity, others whether she had refused an offer too late repented. Eleanor allowed none of it to alter her pace. London had tested her endurance, and she had met it without yielding herself. Whatever came next would be shaped by her own choosing. The Duke of Harrowfield arrived moments later, his presence commanding without effort. He dismounted his horse and handed the reins to a groom, his attention already fixed upon the path ahead. He had spent the night in restless deliberation, turning over every argument that had once justified restraint and finding each one diminished by the memory of Eleanor's quiet strength. Duty still spoke, but its voice no longer drowned out conscience. He understood now that neutrality was itself a decision, and one that would condemn him to regret. As he entered the promenade, conversation faltered, then resumed in cautious fragments. Eyes followed his progress, registering the tension in his stride, the intent in his expression. When he saw Eleanor ahead, standing beneath the budding branches of a chestnut tree, he slowed, the moment stretching as though the air itself had thickened. She had not seen him yet, and for a heartbeat he considered turning away, preserving the distance that had defined them. Instead, he stepped forward. Eleanor sensed him before she heard him, a shift in the atmosphere that drew her attention. She turned, and their gazes met, unguarded and steady. The murmur around them receded, replaced by a silence born not of command, but anticipation. He approached with measured purpose, stopping at a distance proper yet charged with meaning. For an instant, neither spoke, the weight of their shared history pressing between them. "Miss Whitcombe," he said at last, his voice low, controlled, yet carrying, "I have been remiss." The simplicity of the admission startled her. She inclined her head slightly, waiting. He extended his hand, not to take hers yet, but in invitation. Eleanor hesitated only a fraction before placing her gloved fingers in his palm. The gesture, though restrained, sent a ripple through the assembled crowd. Public contact, however minimal, was never accidental. "I once spoke of fitness," the Duke continued, his gaze unwavering. "I measured worth by circumstances rather than character, and in doing so, I failed both." He lifted her hand slowly, deliberately, allowing every observer to understand the significance of what followed. When he pressed his lips to her glove, it was not a fleeting courtesy, but a solemn acknowledgment, bestowed with reverence. The act carried no haste, no apology, only certainty. Gasps rose and fell, whispers stilled, and in that moment, society understood that this was not scandal, but declaration. Eleanor felt the tremor of it course through her, not as triumph, but as release. He lowered her hand, yet did not relinquish it at once. "You have shown courage where I showed caution," he said quietly. "If there is to be judgment, let it fall upon me." She met his gaze, her voice calm, though emotion stirred beneath the surface. "I never sought vindication," she replied. "Only fairness." "You have both," he answered, and for the first time, warmth softened his restraint. Around them, the promenade resumed its breath, conversation rekindled with altered tone. Eleanor was no longer the object of speculation, but of recognition. The Duke offered his arm, and she accepted, not as concession, but as choice. Together, they walked on, their pace unhurried, their proximity a statement more eloquent than any announcement. As the afternoon waned, carriages departed, and the crowd thinned. Eleanor knew that her intended departure from London would be postponed, though not abandoned. Some decisions required time to settle into truth. The Duke, for his part, felt the weight of expectation lift, replaced by a resolve both steadier and more human. He had chosen not merely affection, but accountability. When at last they parted, it was with mutual understanding rather than promise. Eleanor returned to her lodgings, her future uncertain yet undeniably altered. The Duke watched her go, aware that the path ahead would demand consistency equal to the courage he had finally displayed. Yet as Hyde Park emptied and evening drew near, both carried the same quiet certainty. What had begun in judgment had found its answer in respect, and respect, once publicly claimed, could not easily be withdrawn.